Hey, I'm Roland with Mobile Geeks, and what we're gonna do today is a quick or a bit more in-depth comparison of the Medion Akoya P2211T or 12T, depending on where you buy it, and the ASUS Transformer Book T100TA. The two devices are both Bay Trail based. The T100TA has a Intel Atom Z3740 quad-core 1.33 GHz SoC in there, and the Medion runs on a Celeron N2910, which is also a quad-core Bay Trail based SoC, but in this case it's fixed at 1.66 GHz or 1.6 GHz, while the T100TA actually has a turbo boost that goes up to 1.86 GHz. The two devices are selling at pretty much the same price points. This one is going for 450 euros or 399, depending if you buy it at Aldi or in normal retail. And the ASUS is actually selling for 429, but the version with a 500 gig hard drive in the base is also a bit more expensive, so that one is going for 479. The main differences are actually in this case the size, that's for sure, because the ASUS is only a 10.1 inch tablet with a dock, and the Medion is actually an 11.6 inch tablet including a keyboard dock. Let's try and quickly check out the size comparison in this case, and then you can see that the Medion is actually a lot wider and also taller than the ASUS device. What's also interesting to see is that the Medion is way heavier than the ASUS. This one is only 1.11 kilograms, and this weighs in at close to 1.7 kilograms, which is because of the size of the tablet itself and the dock, which is also including a 500 gig hard drive in this case and a separate battery. Other than that, the screen resolution on the Medion is actually full HD, so this gives you 1920 by 1080 pixels on an AHVA, that's Advanced Hyper Viewing Angle, so it's not an IPS panel as on the ASUS, and the resolution is also lower on the ASUS, so that's only 1366 by 768, 10.1 inch panel standard size right here. Let's go quickly around the devices, just check out the ports and stuff. You get a lot more ports on the Medion, which I'm going to show you in a second. We start out with a 720p cam up here, a decent sized trackpad down here, but let's get to the base later on. I'm just going to close it down and show you around the device while it's closed. Up here we have the power button, next to that is the volume rocker. This is the headset jack. That's the micro USB port right there. A micro HDMI out, so you can definitely plug this into an external display. You have actually 4 USB ports. There's 2 ports on the tablet itself. The left one right here is a USB 3 port. The other one next to that is a USB 2.0 port. That is a mic, noise cancellation I would guess, and one of the 2 Dolby speakers. On the bottom and on the back there's pretty much nothing, except behind this hinge is the usual stuff to connect it to the tablet, or the dock actually. I'm going to show you that in a second. Right here is the second speaker, and yeah, that's pretty much it. There's no camera on the top, but you can see it has a non-glossy lid, so that doesn't actually attract any fingerprints at all. It's fully made out of plastic, and yeah, we'll see about that later. I'm just going to quickly disconnect it from the dock and to show you the ports down here. So what you get is on the left and right 2 hinge connectors, so that's where the device gets connected to the tablet or the keyboard base. In the middle is a USB 3.0 and data port, and right next to that is the charging port, so you can actually charge the tablet all on its own. Let's move on to the ASUS device right now. I'm just going to quickly turn on the Medion again. I'm going to log in later. On this one we have also a 720p capable webcam on the front. there's pretty much nothing else. On the keyboard dock you get a decent sized keyboard with a non-glossy finish up here. The trackpad is decent sized too. The keys are pretty much alright, but you should be able to type a bit better on the Medion because it has a bigger keyboard, and the quality of the keyboard is actually a little better than on the ASUS device. Let's go on around the tablet itself. Up here we have the volume rocker, and this is the start button actually, so you don't get a start button on the front of the tablet to access the start screen, but you always have to hit this button or the Windows button on the keyboard. On the bottom you have just the hinge with those two stands right here that are actually totally useless when you've opened up the device because it starts slipping around and stuff, but I'll talk about that later on. Right here we have the headset jack. This is again a micro HDMI out, so you can connect this one to an external display too, and right next to that is a micro USB port that doubles as the power plug. So this one actually gets charged through the micro USB port. It has a standard tablet power brick that only outputs 10 watts, so it might take, or it does definitely take long times to actually charge the device. Over here we have a micro SD card slot as on the Medion, and as my camera already showed you, the back is very glossy. It does attract a lot of fingerprints. It has this kind of circular pattern on there, just like on the ASUS devices, for example the Ultrabooks. And on the left and right you get two small speakers that actually output a pretty good sound. It does have a better sound than on the Medion. On the bottom, on the dock itself, there's only this single USB 3.0 port, but at least you get a full-size port on the dock. I'm gonna try and open this up and unlock it from the dock so you can see the dock connectors right here. So on the left and right again, hinge connectors, and in the middle is a USB 3.0 connector that also transports the power from the tablet towards the dock. Concerning the quality of the two devices, I think personally that the ASUS is doing a bit better. It has definitely overall a higher build quality than the Medion. The tablet itself feels pretty sturdy. It doesn't bend or anything when you hold it in your hands. It's pretty light, only at 576 grams, while the Medion actually weighs in at 820 something grams, which is pretty light for an 11.6 inch tablet, but it could definitely be a lot lighter. What I want to criticize about the ASUS tablet is actually the keyboard dock, which doesn't feel very well made. It is pretty decent actually for the price point, at least. We're talking about $379 US, I think. So that's a pretty good deal. This one is without a hard drive in it. In Germany there's actually a version available or coming to the market right now that has a 500 gig hard drive included, just like on the Medion, but there's definitely no battery in here or anything else. The trackpad is pretty good. It does have a good clicking point. There's been some quality issues on the trackpad where the surface would come off, or the glue on the surface would start to loosen, and that is something that ASUS has been working on as I've been talking to their German PR department. The keys are pretty nice. It doesn't flex or anything. The size is, if you're used to netbook keyboards, that is definitely something you can live with, and it is pretty good to type on, I think, or at least with my big hands I can easily type on this. Talking about quality issues, the hinge is definitely something that is not criticizable on the ASUS T100TA. It is made of metal and it has a good working mechanism up here. That's definitely a difference towards the Medion, where the keyboard dock feels kind of flimsy. It is very thin and it does bend a lot. The screws aren't the tightest and it does tend to bend quite a lot. And again, the hinge is fully made out of plastic in this case, and it feels kind of wobbly when you have the tablet set into its base and you start tipping or hitting the tablet. It does tend to wobble a bit. The mechanism to actually affix the tablet to the dock doesn't have any springs in here, so you always have to slide this back to front. Does take some getting used to, but if you've been doing this for a couple of times, it's probably going to be alright. The keyboard is very nicely designed. It has decent sized keys. It's good to type on. For me personally, it feels a bit better to type on than on the ASUS device. Also, the trackpad is better designed, I personally think, because it works pretty well with those borders around here to use the gestures on Windows 8.1, and it's also a lot bigger. Yeah, what else is there to talk about on the dock? For me, I don't like these sharp edges on the sides. This one actually has some really, I don't know if you can see that on the cam, but the edges of the device are pretty sharp, so that they tend to actually, like, you can poke yourself with this and it's gonna probably hurt. There's maybe some people who don't like the fact that the edges are so sharp, so when you hit it or have your palms on here and your wrists are starting to hit this, the corner or the edges of the device, that might also be bothering a couple of people. So as I said, next up is the performance. The two devices actually have 2 gigs of RAM and 64 gigabytes of SSD storage. I think they're both using a eMMC module in here. I definitely know that for the ASUS. Performance-wise, the ASUS is actually doing a bit better because this one has a turbo boost of 1.86 gigahertz, so in the end it is a bit faster than the Medion. And let's just quickly move to the desktop right here and I'll show you the benchmark results. So the 1.6 gigahertz Celeron in this Medion P2211T or 12T actually scores 15,286 points in 3D Mark's iStorm benchmark and 1172 points in the CloudGate benchmark. It should, performance or graphics wise, be a bit better than the Atom Z3740 in the ASUS, because the graphics part on the Medion should be a bit faster, but in the end overall scores are going to be higher on the T100TA because it just has a faster CPU. And that results in a score of 16,896 points in iStorm and 1233 in 3D Mark's CloudGate benchmark. So performance-wise and gaming-wise, I would go with the ASUS T100TA. And that part about the performance actually goes on to the SSDs in here, or the flash memory, where the Medion actually scores just under 84 megabytes in read speeds and close to 41 in writing. And the 4K reads, which are a bit more important in day-to-day use, are also lower than on the T100. So the Medion scores 7.2 or 5.3 reading, and in writing you end up with just over 2 megabytes and 2.7 megabytes in the writing tests for 4K. Compare that to the T100TA, you get actually 103 or 104, close to 104 megabytes read speed on the eMMC module in the T100TA, and also in the writing area you're faster at 42 megabytes per second. And in the 4Ks you have close to 10 megabytes reading and 4.0 or 4.4 in writing, and that is definitely a bit better performance-wise. Another thing I want to talk about on the two devices is actually the screen, or the screen brightness, where the Medion scores pretty good on brightness and overall resolution. You get Full HD on the Medion device. It has the colors are a bit more washed out than on the ASUS T100TA, but you also only have a 1366 by 768 resolution, as I mentioned earlier, and it is definitely not the brightest display. The brightness is on both devices right now set up to the highest. Let me just quickly check that. Yeah. So if you put them right next to each other, you'll see that the Medion is definitely scoring better in the brightness. And even compared to other devices, the ASUS is not having the brightest display. You might want to consider using this outside, because you're definitely going to have some problems reading the screen there, because it doesn't perform very well on the brightness. For me personally, the quality of the two devices, or the screens of the two devices, is actually, I see the Medion pulling ahead because of the higher resolution and the better brightness. The viewing angles are definitely better on the T100TA because it has an IPS panel, and the colors are also a bit more naturally looking or better reproducing than on the Medion. Another thing you want to consider is that the full resolution is actually something that impacts your use on the desktop on the Medion. So this runs 1920 by 1080 pixels, and in the end you might be seeing some problems reading the fonts on the desktop without scaling. And since Windows 8.1 still doesn't really scale very good, you might want to consider that if your eyes aren't doing so good anymore. Where the ASUS is actually doing a pretty good job of mixing size and resolution, and considering the fact that Windows isn't scaling so good, I would go with the ASUS if you have some issues with your eyes, because the resolution of 1366 by 768 is just more suitable for a screen size of this kind. Another thing I want to mention about the SSDs is actually not about the performance, but on the setup. The ASUS is actually wasting a lot of space on the 64 gig SSD by including their recovery image on the SSD or the flash memory itself, where Medion is actually able to put it on the hard drive. So the 500 gigs is not fully available, but you get like 8 something gigabytes of that get lost to the recovery partition. But because Medion is actually pre-installing quite a bit of their own and other partners' software, you will end up with, let me just check that out. I think that works out to 47 gigs of freely available space on the SSD on this one, and this only has close to 32 gigabyte available, because both devices actually have Office 2013 Home and Student installed. When you try to make your decision between the ASUS T100TA and the Medion P2211T, is the weight. That's another thing that's really important. This combined weighs in at 1.7 kilograms, as I said, so that's very heavy compared to the 1.11 kilograms on the ASUS T100, which is definitely better for traveling people or for people who are carrying this device around all day. They're still both pretty light, and yeah, it's just the tablet over here weighs in at 576 grams, and the dock adds another 534 grams, I think. So in the end, again, 1.11 kilograms, where this actually weighs 821 grams on the tablet itself, and the dock is even heavier because of its integrated battery and the 500 gig hard drive. Mobility wise, definitely a point for the ASUS T100TA right here. Performance wise, there should also be mentioned that the Medion has a Celeron SoC in here that draws around 7 point or something, maybe 6 plus watts, where the Atom actually is able to run with 2.5, or the whole platform actually ends up under 3 watts. So the two devices actually end up with the same runtime, or battery runtime. You get around 10 hours on both devices. In my everyday use, I made it above 8 hours, definitely above 8 hours on the ASUS tablet, which doesn't have an add-on battery in the base, where the Medion makes it to just around the same, maybe a bit lower, because of the bigger screen, which also draws a lot of power, and the higher brightness. And including the CPU, you'll end up using that battery in the base to actually extend the usage time up to 10 hours or a bit more. If you disconnect it, the power gets disconnected for the dock too. That's right, to be expected. If you disconnect it, you'll end up with a running time of just over 5 to 6 hours on the tablet alone. If you add in the base, which adds another, let me see, 26 watt hours to the 41 that is in the tablet itself, you end up with 67 watt hours. So if they actually had put an Atom Z3740 into the Medion device, you would get insane runtimes, but they haven't. So you actually get more usage time on the ASUS device that only has a 31 watt hour battery. So which one would I consider for myself first? It's hard to tell which one I would want. They're both in the same price league. There's a couple of disadvantages that the ASUS has. Its lower resolution is something I could actually live with because it's a very compact device, and the high resolution on the Medion is actually sometimes hard to use for people with eyes that are not as good. Again, the resolution is something I really like about this device because this 11.6-inch screen is definitely good. If you have decent eyes for usage on the desktop, you can read everything. You can use more windows at once, and it's kind of hard to decide. I personally use these devices more as a hardcore user. I'm blogging and writing a lot, so basically I'm totally stuck on the desktop. I have 10, 20, 30 tabs open in the browser, and that is something that I can do better on the Medion because of its high resolution. But the performance, the CPU performance and the SSD performance and everything else actually is a bit worse than on the Atom in the T100. So in the end, what I would want is basically a mixture of both devices. I don't need the separate battery in the dock. It's nice to have. The 500 gig hard drive is also nice to have. Medion has done a really good job cramming all those ports in here. So I still really don't know which one to choose. I would personally go probably with the ASUS and just hope that they figure out something about the charging part, where you'll always be using this standard USB charger, which again only puts out 10 watts, and you'll end up with long charging times. Another thing that sucks about this device, and I really mean sucks, is that it doesn't work with many other 2 amp chargers from other companies. So you might end up getting some trouble with charging. I actually ordered a first device of the T100. I had one before and I had to exchange it because it wouldn't charge, or it would take forever to charge. And I still think that the T100TA, even this one, has some issues charging. So you might want to check that out first before you definitely decide about buying. On the Medion, I have to say, you get this big power brick that is actually a standard power brick. I don't know how much power it puts out. I think this should be around 40 watts. It's definitely nice to have because you can charge the device faster. It even has its own power switch down here. Works pretty well too, but you have to use this, and you have to carry this around to actually charge it. I like this actually better because, again, for me it's about performance and I need it to charge fast. So nice to have on the ASUS, but I like the brick solution of the Medion better. But something I need to talk about there is this one actually makes kind of weird noises. I don't know if it's a defect on the device itself or on the power brick or the charging circuits down here, but sometimes you'll end up when you plug it in with some crackling noises that are pretty disturbing actually. I haven't checked it out if it does only crackle on the keyboard, so there might be some cheap components in here that make that noise. It does definitely work, but again, I can't decide yet. So what I would recommend is basically, if you're somebody who wants to replace a desktop or use this as your single device, you should definitely get the Medion. Better resolution, better overall performance, more ports. And if you want to go mobile and use it as a secondary device, go with the ASUS. You can definitely use this for your university work, taking notes and stuff. This is more a replacement for an existing notebook or even a desktop. So I was rolling with Mobile Geeks, checking out the P2211T from Medion and the ASUS Transformer Book T100TA. See ya!